So, welcome to our webinar, How to Make Better Decisions and Problem Solve with Colours. For those who don't know me, my name is Michelle MacArthur Morgan and I'm the founding partner and creator of the Jigsaw Discovery Tool. And I spent the last 20 some years now actually working in learning development, concentrating really on creating and developing or helping other people to create and develop helpful habits and positive behaviours. And we kind of, our work does that at an individual, a team and an organisational level. And recently I've just embarked on what's going to be quite a long journey, but a journey towards a doctorate in organisational neuroscience. So all the time we're kind of trying to make sure that the latest underpinning neuroscience is being used and implemented within our programmes. Are continually being bombarded with information and being called upon to resolve problems and make decisions. And from the simplest decision of deciding whether or not you prefer a hot or a cold drink, for example, to some of the more complex and strategic decisions that we're often required to make. And they all take a toll on our brain power. Problem solving, decision making, it's very energy consuming. And especially when we're already experiencing so much kind of overload, overwhelm, stress, which makes it even more challenging to make good decisions. Now we're going to be discussing why so many people make poor decisions. We're going to be looking at some insights into how we typically make decisions, the decision-making process. We're also going to be exploring some of the different decision-making styles. We're then having a look at how higher levels of self-awareness and knowledge of behavioural preferences can help us to understand better not only the decisions that we ourselves make, but also the decisions that our colleagues, our leaders make. And finally, we're going to leave with some tools to help you get started immediately to become a more, what we will say, a more conscious and effective decision maker. That kind of I've just started a long journey to the organisational neuroscience doctorate, but it's always been a passion of ours is to follow the science, listen to what science is telling us, which is not always what conventional wisdom would have us believe. And in our webinar today, we're going to be following some of that science, which is why we've broken it down, the content of the webinar, into 4 digestible chapters. So the chapters you can see on screen, those 4 different areas. So if we move straight into chapter 1, why do we make so many poor decisions? And I'd love to start off by just getting your thoughts on this. So as we're a small group, please feel free, you can either unmute yourself to let me know, or just pop your answers in chat. Why do you think that in general we make so many poor decisions? Any thoughts?
I'm not really sure, Michelle. Now I know I make poor decisions, and that's why I'm so interested in this webinar to try and understand it. But perhaps it's because we have to make so many, so that the quality of each decision might be kind of limited.
To make so many, we've got people saying make do quickly, we rush, emotional knee-jerk, not considered enough, rushing too much, too little information, bias. Absolutely, all really kind of great things. So I just want to look at those and kind of some of the key reasons why we do make so many poor decisions. And let's face it, we do not have to look very far to see some of the poor decisions that are being made by even world leaders. And it's quite frightening, actually, thinking of the devastation that some of their decisions could actually lead to because they're making poor decisions. And whether it's you personally at home or at work, whether it's your leaders, the large global organisations, our government, our world leaders, we all make poor decisions. So what I want to do is have a look at some of those reasons and what we've actually learned from neuroscience, what that's actually telling us as well. I think Donna actually mentioned bias as one of the reasons. And every day we make thousands of decisions. However, to save time and energy, our brains don't give each decision equal attention. Instead, we take mental shortcuts, which we know as biases. Now, biases are neither good or bad. In some situations, they can be really helpful, but likewise, in other situations, they can hinder us and have a negative effect upon the decisions we're making. So, for example, if you have a bias which compels us to make decisions quickly, for example, in a situation of a building being on fire, that's very, very helpful. But in different circumstances, say, let's say in a HR matter, for example, then making a quick, rash decision could end up being very costly. There's some last count, something like 180 different biases. But fortunately, they've been grouped together into just 5 categories, what we call the big 5. So we'll just kind of quickly mention those big 5. So the first one is our similarity bias. We prefer things, people that are like us. Things that we can identify, things or people that we can see a similarity in. So again, most obviously the first thing that comes into mind there is in making decisions about hiring people, who to promote, who to actually assign projects to. We're much more likely to favour people that we subconsciously actually have some kind of similarity with, what was known as our in-group. And we know, again, from science, that we much more favour in-group people to out-group people, people who we see for some reason are different to ourselves. This is our experience bias, and we prefer to act quickly rather than take time. And we've got an inbuilt need for certainty of human beings, to know what's going on. And the downside of that is it means that sometimes it actually makes us want to rush into making a decision without fully considering all the facts. The third bias is our experience bias. And we take our perception to be the objective truth, to be the fact, the reality of the situation. When the truth is that every single person's in the world, their brain is slightly different. We all have our own lenses that we see the world through. We see things in a slightly different way. Category is distance bias. We prefer things that are closer to opposed to things that are further away. Now, this is actually becoming quite a common bias these days in the hybrid world, because we're much more likely to favour people who are sitting in the room with us at a meeting than actually people who are joining us via Zoom or Teams or some other video kind of platform. So distance bias is becoming quite a major kind of bias that we need to be aware of. And our last bias category is safety bias. We protect ourselves against loss more, seek out gain. And one of the simplest ways to kind of illustrate this is we actually, and again, this is scientifically kind of been proven from a neuroscience point of view, we actually prefer not to lose money even more than we prefer to gain money. So in other words, kind of bad is stronger than good. So those are the key kind of biases. And one of the ways that we can actually overcome to mitigate bias is to actually try and put some distance between ourselves and the decision. And one way that some people use quite effectively is to actually imagine they've already made that decision and made that decision successfully. And that can help to take away some of the biases and some of the emotionality that is actually surrounding a decision. Reason I want to bring to your attention why we don't always make great decisions is something that is known as the unstated goal. It has an unstated goal, And the faster, the goal is the faster that we can reach agreement and make a decision, then the quicker we can get back out there and get on with all those other tasks, all the things that are on our to-do list. Now, the human brain dislikes uncertainty and the unknown, so making a decision, a quick decision, actually helps to reduce any cognitive uneasiness in our brains. So, but when we make this decision in a quick way, then there is a tendency for groupthink to set in. We don't actually challenge the decisions. We don't think about the decisions enough. We just make a quick decision. So there is an increased risk of decisions being flawed. So many poor decisions are made. It's the busyness of our lives. And again, you said that in the no time to think, rushing, etc. We're constantly being bombarded with information and noise, which leads to constant distraction, and it interferes with our ability to think. Now, the brain has got a very limited capacity. Although it's a mighty powerful, wonderful organ, it's actually got a limited capacity. It can hold a maximum of 4 ideas at a time. Now, the ideal is no more than 3 ideas at a time. And when it comes to making comparisons, actually no more than 2 ideas should be considered at a time if we want to give it our best attention and cognitive power. Now, it's estimated that our minds today are stimulated with 7 times as much information and data as the brains of our grandparents were when they were our age. So 7 times as much information and data is bombarding our brains more than our grandparents when our grandparents were our age. And if you add into that the longer working hours, the greater accessibility to be able to work via technology, leading to blurred working hours, meaning that our ability to be able to switch off is challenged, and our brains are actually becoming frazzled. And all this makes thinking harder. Our cognitive abilities are impaired. And when our brains are frazzled and we experience brain fog, that's probably a term that most of you have kind of heard and probably use, then we cannot expect to make our best decisions. It is a very powerful organ. It has got limited resources, which we should ignore at our peril. Decision making is very energy intense. Every time we make a decision, our energy levels and our brain resources are reduced. And it's not until we next rest and sleep that our energy levels are replenished. So each time you make a decision, we have less resources available to make the next decision. And the more complex a decision is, the more resources are consumed. A moment just to kind of reflect upon a typical day. From the moment you wake up, we start making decisions. What shirt are you going to wear? What are you going to have for breakfast or for lunch? Are you going to go to the gym after work? And that's before we've even arrived at work. And then how many of us then open up our emails? And we make even more decisions. So by the time that you have to make that big decision, by the time you're going into that important meeting, you've already used up quite a lot of that valuable and limited resource, the brain power. Adding pressure under to complete all your other jobs so that you want to get the meeting over as quickly as possible, the brain fog, your biases, and we can start to see why so many poor decisions are made. Now, one other fact just to be aware of, especially in the world as it is at the moment, there is so much unknown in the world, and we're having to work with, well, the brain's having to work with what it would say is the new and novel situations, things that we haven't seen or experienced before. And therefore, again, from a brain's perspective, it's very energy intense and depleting of our brain's resources. But simply, why do we make so many poor decisions? Because we don't work with our brain in mind, and we lead such busy lives, the busyness of the world. We're living in a world where we're constantly switched on, and we don't give the brain the nutrients, the resources that it needs in order to perform at its best, in order to make the best decisions. What I'd like you to do is just kind of take a moment just to kind of think about how that applies to you. Do you kind of tend to rush the decisions that you actually make? Biases come into play for you, do you think? Which category are you most likely to use? The 2 now. So chapter 2 is decision-making styles. Over the years, our decision-making develops a bit of a consistent pattern, which we can then describe as our decision-making style. And our decision-making style is grounded in our thinking style, and it's linked to our behavioural preferences. Okay, we're going to be focusing upon the 4 key behavioural preferences. Now, when you complete a Jigsaw discovery profile, you create what we call your personal behavioural map, which illustrates your preference in each of the 4 key areas. And then it highlights your flexibility to adapt and flex your behaviour to the situation. So, a moment for reflection. What factors, what do you actually think about when you consider making a decision? So what would be the important things that you would actually think about in making a decision? And again, just a moment or two, just for quiet kind of reflection before I introduce the 4 different styles. Want to write it down, pop it on a piece of paper to help you just kind of remember. Made 1 or 2 points thinking about how you go about, what you consider. So Colin, personal decision has more feeling. When I have experience, intuition comes in, intuitive comes in. Yeah, absolutely, Colin. Thank you for sharing that. Let's look at these 4 styles now. So people in Jigsaw terms lead with a red preference, the intuitive thinking style. It's all about that kind of the facts, the headline data, being rational and logical, want to make a quick decision, but they are open to changing their minds and making another decision if required. They tend to remain very objective, don't get caught up in the emotions of the situation. And the one key thing that is always at the front of their mind is, how does this idea, this option, this solution, how will it achieve the desired outcome or the result that we want? And just as a matter of fact, people who lead with a red preference tend to make the highest number of decisions. Intuitive feeling people, in Jigsaw terms, this is our yellow preference, and they tend to have a much more kind of variable approach to decision making. And sometimes their decisions might be thought of as being quite bold and daring and impulsive. And the things that they tend to look for in a solution, in an idea, is that novelty. They look for the kind of the conceptual information. They look for emerging patterns and trends, and they tend to jump from idea to idea before finally making the final kind of decision. Our green, Jigsaw green, the sensing, feeling person, then somebody who leads with a green preference focuses very much on the people aspect, preserving and maintaining relationships. And they don't like too much focus on pure fact. It's that kind of fact, but very much from a people perspective. They want to take people into consideration at every point of the decision-making process. They consider options and how the different options, ideas align to their personal values, the organisational values. They demonstrate and vocalise their empathy and compassion. They're not drawn to future possibilities. It's all about what's happening now. How are our people feeling? What are they experiencing? What emotions have they got right now? And when it comes to that kind of decision, they want to be able to understand the reasoning of the decision through the lens of the people rather than the facts. And our blue preference, in Jigsaw terms, the sensing, thinking person, they all the fine print. They want to be able to scrutinise the detail. They won't be hurried and rushed into making a decision. They need to make sure they've got all that information available beforehand. They're often considered to make decisions that are quite careful, considered, prudent, or even conservative in their kind of approach. One thing about they actually desire certainty. They do not expect change being made to a decision. Once a decision is made, they expect that that decision will be carried out to the letter, to the end. They expect time to be able to process information. And again, this links into not being hurried into making a decision. And they want to know, why do we change what we're doing anyway? What is wrong with things now? What is wrong with the way that we do things now? And last but not least, they're seeking that correctness of the decision, the conformity, the correctness of the decision that is being made. Knowledge of the preference we lead with is important. I've said we're all that kind of unique combination of 4 preferences. Therefore, it's important to consider the influence of what we call our backup or our secondary preference. Now, a significant number of people lead with either what is known as a double preference or have a very strong secondary preference. So we're going to look at the influence of some of these. So if we start off, for example, somebody who has that red and blue preference leads with red and blue. So they've got a need for both fact and detailed information. They need that logical analysis, but yet they need to be able to have step-by-step sequential processing. If we look at yellow and green, well, that's relationships. It's about the people, but it's also about making quite bold and daring, futuristic, novel, new kind of ideas. And green preferences. Now, in a way, they're experiencing internal conflict between 2 very different preferences. On the one hand, we've got that rational, logical fact base, but on the other hand, we've got a need for strong, people-focused, relationship-focused information. People who lead with red and green preferences typically shift between facts and feelings, trying to kind of find a pathway through the middle that meets both the needs of for the logical, rational decision-making, objective decision-making, but still giving consideration for the feelings of the people. And when a decision is taken, or they have to indeed make a decision, which may have negative consequences or be hurtful to people in some kind of way, then this person tends to agonize over the decision that they're about to make or they have just made. Yellow and blue preference. Now, these people often speak of this internal conflict, and you can actually sometimes see it as an observer, the internal conflict that they're experiencing, because it's like having 1 foot on the accelerator and 1 foot on the brake, and they shift between kind of risk-taking and safekeeping, bold and daring and conservative and safe options. blue and green. About having structures and procedures, yet maintaining high people focus. Being sensitive, but whilst remaining careful. Liking detail, but focusing on the human values. So again, we can see a little bit of kind of pull in two different directions. Our last double preference, the red and yellow preferences. And this is kind of having a logical, analytical, rational thinking process. But then the decisions, the solutions that we're looking for, they want to be bold and daring, futuristic, perhaps creative, novel. Our preferences, our thinking preferences, our behavioural preference can influence our decision making. Now, there is one additional thing that we should also focus on, and that is our preference for introversion and extroversion. Now, first of all, as a generalism, and I do appreciate this is very much a generalism, and I actually go against this generalism, so I know it's true. And that is people who lead with red and or yellow preferences are more likely to be more extrovert. They're more likely to direct and receive energy from the external world. Whereas people who have a preference for the green and blue are much more likely to direct and receive energy from their inner world. They're more likely to be introvert. Now, as I said, there's exceptions to the rule, but to give you just kind of some examples. So extroverts, for example, are more likely to want to talk through their thoughts and their ideas, their decisions. They're more likely to want to kind of share their thoughts and feelings more freely. Extroverts actually talk in order to think. Whereas with introverts, they want to think things through first. They're more likely to hold back on sharing their thoughts and feelings until they have had time to think things through themselves. Kind of moving to our next chapter, just want you just to think, and Colin, Christopher has already shared his preference. He thinks his preference is a sensing feeling preference. But again, just for you to think about, what is your decision-making style? Which of those seem to fit you the best? You just want to perhaps pop it in chat and share it. As Christopher shared his. Perhaps want to pop yours in chat, that'd be great. Jamie's a red one. Yep. Thanks for sharing that, Jamie. Well, I know I am red and blue. Any other thoughts? Something just to reflect on, kind of after today's session. As I say, the recording will be available. So please, go back and watch the recording and maybe just think about what is your own decision-making style. Because your decision-making style will be your kind of starting point. It'll be the place that you kind of will go to, especially when you're feeling under pressure. So if you're going to rush a decision, it's probably going to be made from your decision-making preference. How we actually make decisions. So really in this chapter, what we're going to be looking at are the different stages of decision making to illustrate how we kind of make the decision, with the purpose really of helping you to increase your conscious awareness of the process that you go through and your colleagues go through. And hopefully that will then enable you to review that process and adapt it if needed. So effective decision making actually requires flexibility to move through each of these different stages, not necessarily in a process order. It sometimes requires us to spend more time on one stage rather than other stages. We might need to go round through the process. We might need to revisit certain stages. There's no hard and fixed rule with it. It's really just to kind of give you some structure to the decision-making process and highlight those kind of stages that most of us tend to go through. Many variations of the decision-making process. We just happen to use a variation of a 5-stage process. Now, our intention today is to provide you really with insights into the needs and behaviours of the preferences at the 5 stages of the decision-making process. Because by having this raised level of awareness and understanding of what different preferences require during each stage, it will hopefully provide us with an insight into the way you and your colleagues process information, the way you evaluate options, and what individuals need in terms of data and types of information to be in a position where they can make their best possible decision. We're going to go through each one of these 5 stages, looking at it from the kind of colour perspective, if you like, through the lens of each of the colour preferences. With our red preference. Red preference in preparation, they will want, if you like, the key points, bullet points, top level facts about the situation, an overview. Else will have a clear outcome in mind. They might also have a fallback, the position that they will not accept anything less than. And they will go to that meeting or go into that decision-making process with a few ideas and options of their own that they know or they believe will actually achieve the desired outcome. And at the yellow preference, they want to seek out and discuss opportunities and possibilities. They may well an assessment of the situation using that intuitive gut feeling. What does it actually mean, this decision, the situation that we're in? And they may even be kind of want to make suggestions of who should actually be involved in that decision-making process. Reference. They look at the current situation. How's it impacting on people right now? They'll want to speak to their colleagues or other people and discuss the situation before, again, going into actually making the decision, in preparation to make a decision. And they'll want some kind of reassurance about how people are going to be supported and cared for once that decision is made, obviously if that's appropriate. Our blue preference, they want clarity around the process that is going to be followed and confirmation that that process will be adhered to. They want to see all the information, all the data, all the detailed analysis and the reports. And they want time to be allowed to carry out their own kind of assessments of the risk, their own kind of analysis to really understand all the information, both the pros and the cons of it. We generate idea stage then. Our red preferences. They in options against the likelihood of achieving that result or the outcome they require. They'll question the thinking behind the ideas of other people's to see how it's actually going to achieve that outcome. And once they feel they've got a good idea, then they just want to make a decision. They want to stop generating ideas and actually make the decision. Well, preference. Once they start generating ideas, they just keep going. with multiple ideas. And even when you've moved on from generating ideas, they still may be coming up with ideas. And the one thing to know about people who have a high preference in the yellow area is the first ideas are not always the best ideas. They actually, especially if they're extrovert, they will be speaking to think. So the first ideas, there might not be anything wrong with them, but if we allow the ideas to continue flowing, they tend to come out with some of their better ideas the more they kind of generate the ideas. And creative thinking, they like to find new ideas, new options, new ways of doing things, and they tend to listen to the ideas of other people and then build on them and extend them. For instance, they like to stick with the known and refine existing ways. They like to build on what they already know. They look for options that will support or benefit people in some way. And they'll only share their own options and ideas when they're confident about them and they know that other people will support their ideas. And then they look for options that are practical, that are detailed, that have been well thought through. They want to have all that information. They want to know what the facts are. They'll start very much with concrete facts and then want the detail. So how do we go about choosing the best idea then? So at this stage, our red preferences, they will push for the idea that they believe is going to give them the best goal outcome that they're striving from. They will push for the decision that will deliver the quickest result. They'll make it very clear actually as to which idea they are supporting. And in all honesty, all they want to do is get that decision made and get out there and get on with it. Hello preference people. They'll be drawn towards favouring the novel and creative ideas. They're more likely to go with their gut feelings rather than what the data is saying. And they prefer a decision which allows them some freedom or flexibility during the implementation. They don't want to feel that they've got to stick to a rigid kind of process. They want to be able to kind of use that creativity, come up with different ways of doing things if they feel there is a better way of doing something. Friends? Well, we'll choose ideas by looking at how the idea aligns to the values of their organisation and their personal values and beliefs. How will an idea benefit people? What will be the possible consequences? These are all things they'll want to explore and that will influence their final choice. And they'll also want to consider the feelings and emotions of everybody that's going to be involved or affected by this decision. Details of the implementation is important. So they will want to know, they'll be looking for that well thought out plan. They'll want an idea that will follow standard practice and procedures, and that there's kind of procedures and things are already being thought through and written down, hopefully, that they're kind of produced and ready and waiting to go. They will not make a decision until they are sure they have got all the information. They will just simply delay making a decision. The things I should say there as well. I said reds make by far the highest number of decisions. Blues make by far the highest percentage of correct decisions. thinking about, they won't be rushed into making a decision. They're much slower in that, or can be much slower in the decision making process, but they rarely have to go back and change a decision unless some major kind of, COVID happens to come along and then we all have to change our decisions, something like that. But usually blues make by far the highest percentage of correct decisions, but make far less decisions than a red. But when it comes to putting the ideas into action, then red preferences look for speed, efficiency. They'll take charge if necessary. They'll make tough decisions if necessary, tough choices to keep things on track. And if it requires doing a U-turn, they'll do a U-turn. They'll make another decision. Friends, they show their enthusiasm for an idea and they provide encouragement to other people. They can kind of take people along with them, but they need to be kept close to where the energy, to be kept involved. They need a visible role in the implementation of an idea. And they gain people's support through influencing and taking them, carrying them along with them. Lead with the green preference. They want to kind of connect current actions with the benefits that they're providing for people. So how are the actions that they're doing? How is it actually helping the people? How is it helping others? Implementation is through team working. They very much like to feel that it's a team. It's teamwork, that they are one of the team. They're quite happy to be in the background. They don't seek out that public kind of recognition. They don't have to play a visible role in it. And the blue preference, they expect to stick to the plan. Once it's been agreed, no deviations. They want to be able to oversee, to check things. And there is a tendency with some kind of blues, if we overplay this kind of blue preference, that it can lean towards micromanagement. Before starting to actually implement the plan, they want to have those detailed instructions, those guidelines and standards already there in place so that they can be followed. Evaluation. At the evaluation or the review stage, then red preferences look first at the result and the outcome that's achieved. To what extent has this decision been successful? How could the outcome be improved? What could be done to improve the outcome? And as I said, they're quite happy to make a different choice, a new decision, if they feel it will get a better result. The yellow preference, the outcome against what was possible, what could we have done? They construct the story of what has happened, not always factual. They interpret the meaning rather than focusing on concrete data. It's about generating ideas of what could have been done differently. The green preference, review how the decision has affected the people. How are the people feeling, the mood and the emotions of the people? They'll question and reflect upon the individuals involved. Were they the right people involved? Was the decision made by management without involving the team, for example? Who's benefited from the decision? Is it a fair decision? Have values been compromised? And our blue preference, review the systems, the processes involved, the implementation. Did it go as planned? Was the plan followed? Was it adhered to? What has worked? What has not worked? At the kind of very practical task level, how can we plan? How can, the plan or the process be corrected? How can we reduce any possible deviation from the plan and the process? How can we ensure that everyone is going to follow the plan or the process? Those are the 5 stages, should I say, of the decision-making process, and looking at it through the needs and wants and preferences of the 4 different decision-making styles or behavioural preferences. So any kind of thoughts or any questions? I appreciate I've Done an awful lot of talking for a few minutes, so maybe just give you a moment or two just to kind of digest that information and reflect on it. But if there's any thoughts, comments, questions, I'm happy. Did you just pop them in chat? Terms, how do you use the tool to determine decision making? Okay, so Jamie has said, in practical terms, how do you use the tool to determine decision making style any different to normal? Now, the way we would do that, Jamie, is we would first of all designing kind of modules, bite-sized kind of modules, of which decision making will be one of those modules. Before coming to do the module, everybody will have done their own behavioural map, completed their own jigsaw. That will give them an indication then of their preferences and what preference they lead with. Then we will go through within the kind of, if we were doing a workshop around this, we would go through those decision-making styles and getting people to identify with. Now there is, there is a close correlation to their preferences, to their own individual thinking styles and their behavioural preferences. So they usually are fairly well aligned, but that's really the process that we would go through to identify those styles. But it's also thinking about those kind of secondary and backup kind of styles. So much there, need to use the tool to see how it all unfolds. Yep. I mean, Colin, just for your information, on the 21st, I think it is, of this month, we have got a showcase of the Jigsaw where you'll get to be able to build your own behavioural profile, your own behavioural map. So you'd be very welcome to join us for that. No doubt some emails will go out with the instructions, or you can actually register through the jigsawdiscoverytool.com website. So if you wanted to kind of see it, or just contact me privately, and I'm happy to kind of go through the tool with you if you like, Colin, no problem. How does urgency affect your normal decision making styles? Urgency, Christopher, would affect it by, when we're under pressure, what I would say normal everyday kind of pressure, when we're in a hurry, we will revert back to our preference. So whichever is your preferred style, whichever is your kind of regular decision-making style, that's the style that you will tend to use, unless you have conscious awareness that, for example, my style, as I said, I lead with red. So therefore, I am consciously aware that perhaps, although I'm in a hurry, actually red might not be the best style to make this decision in. It might be more, if it's a people kind of HR type of issue, even though I'm in a hurry, I might need to step away from my red to navigate around and move into my green style to actually make that decision. And that's kind of where we're going next. In here is chapter 4, how to make better decisions. And that's what it's all about. It's being able to navigate our, what we call our behavioural map, because effective decision making and problem solving requires us to combine and use all of our preferences. And through understanding how each of the preference contributes to the process and learning to navigate a jigsaw map, you can then enhance your decision making style by being a more conscious decision maker, by being able to think, actually I am in a hurry, but is this going to be my best decision if I use it from my preference, if I make it from my preference, in my case, being red, let's say. It helps us to be aware of our strengths and our possible kind of biases and potential kind of where we might be using our wrong preference to make that decision. This is what a behavioural map looks like. Obviously, this one isn't populated, but it helps us by encouraging us to, once we have our own behavioural map, it helps us to be able to navigate our way around our behavioural map, to involve strengths from all 4 preferences by asking appropriate questions. Actually, a little bit like, you know, wearing a different coloured hat. So I'm wearing my red hat. What do I need to think about from this perspective? Then I'll perhaps wear my yellow hat. What do I need to think about from this perspective? Christopher's just asked, would it be an advantage to know the preferences of the people? Absolutely. The more we know about people and understand about people and their preferences, their thinking styles, their behavioural preferences, the far more effective we can all work together, because we can really pull on people's strengths and use their strengths. So, an overview of the behavioural map actually illustrates 4 different perspectives and key questions people are likely to be kind of asking. Well, those are 4 kind of headline kind of questions. And then if we navigate around that behavioural map, we're making a decision. It's easy to see why the decision that we arrive at actually could be a lot better decision than if we just make it from our own perspective. The behavioural map, if you like, provides a bit of a structure to the decision-making process. You can go through and consider each one of those 4 styles. So it's important that we kind of visit each of those 4 styles. But if it's a major decision that you're making, you might want to go back, maybe go around your behavioural map, navigate around that map 2, 3, possibly even 4 times, just to make sure that you've got all the bases covered. You've asked all the questions from all the different perspectives. So to help get us started then, let's look at some of the kind of the questions that we could be asking from each of those 4, let's call them 4 bases, 4 decision-making styles. So from a red perspective, these are the types of questions we want to be asking. Pros and cons, the most logical, which idea will have the best possible outcome, based on what? At that stage, it might be helpful to think, if I was advising a colleague, what would I tell them to do? And why would you tell them to do that particular thing? Be aware of the assumptions you're making. Ask yourself what you've perhaps overlooked previously. Remembering, what are the key priorities in making this decision? Move to the yellow perspective. These are the questions that we should be asking. What is the vision for the future? How will this idea impact upon the future and upon growth in the future? What opportunities and possibilities exist? Even if those opportunities and possibilities at first appear unrealistic or unreasonable, let's get them out there. That's from the yellow's kind of perspective. There's no such thing as a silly idea. That we can be more creative, more innovative. What are the patterns and trends that are emerging? Are there any reoccurring themes going on? Are any of the ideas that are coming out, are they connected? And how can we maintain that flexibility to be able to adapt to the new information that comes along? There are all the questions that each of perspective would ask, but these are samples of those kind of questions. Perspective. How does the idea impact upon the people involved? How are they going to react to the decision? Which of the ideas has the best possible outcome for people involved? And also, though, how do we know that that is the best possible outcome for the people? How we actually ask them? How do we know? Do you, as the decision maker, actually feel about the options, the ideas? Do they make you feel happy, angry, sad, anxious? Think about your own feelings as well in making this decision. Is the idea inclusive? Is it fair? Does it favour any one group of people more than another? Who does it favour? Is there an overall kind of consensus of opinion? And overall consensus of opinion, then what can we actually agree on? And our last kind of perspective, the blue perspective, what are the current facts? Do we have all the facts and details we need to make this decision? What existing knowledge or experience do we have? Have we been in a similar situation before? If so, what did we do? And did it work? What's really practical? Will it work in practice? What evidence is available to support the idea that it will work in practice? And doesn't need changing? Why do we even need that change or that new idea? And is it well thought through? Is there a detailed plan or process? What could go wrong? Got the 4 different kind of questions, if you like, 4 different perspectives. And if we go round and actually navigate around our behavioural map, doesn't matter what order you go round, whatever order suits you to go round, go around through the behavioural map, asking those 4 different styles of questions. That then provides you with the structure to support making a better decision. How can we make better decisions? Well, we can do it by becoming more conscious of the decision-making process, that 5-stage process that we go through. It's stopping you from making the best decision, being aware of the things that get in the way of you making a decision, a good decision. Be aware of your own decision-making style, your strengths, what you contribute in the decision-making process. Where's your own strengths? What are you contributing to the process? And that behavioural map to make sure you consider all aspects of the ideas and the options that are available. If necessary, go around several times to uncover and explore all those different perspectives and answer all those questions. And if you find some questions or aspects more challenging, then you might want to spend more time exploring and discussing them, perhaps again revisiting them. And remember to think about who you actually involve in the decision-making process. Have you got the right people involved in making the decision? At the diversity of people in making that decision. We know again from science, the greater the diversity on all aspects of diversity, the more effective they will work together and the higher chance of making a better decision. I'm happy to take questions. Christopher's actually asked, is there a connection with the De Bono's thinking hats? There's obviously different styles of thinking. I suppose that's kind of the connection. It's just an alternative kind of model. But one of the things that we know from science is that yes, you could go, you know, if your team, let's say, have done their Jigsaw profile, then you could use De Bono hats, but it's a totally different model and concept. And we know from a brain science perspective that the more coherent the learning is, the more effective it will be. And from coherent, what we mean is, this is why we're building up lots of different kind of modules to the Jigsaw, so that you do your what we call the foundation module, you build your own profile, and then from there we can look at how that informs us in making decisions. We can use it as a structure to make a decision, and it's a coherent pathway. From the brain perspective, you're building on and strengthening existing neural networks, which is far more energy efficient. And one of the primary kind of drivers, goals, if you like, of the brain is to keep us safe, and it keeps us safe by preserving our energy levels. So we will always go to a pathway of least resistance that uses the least amount of energy. So by using, yes, you could use de Bono, and there is nothing at all wrong with de Bono. I've used it myself many times. It's just a case of we're looking at the coherence here, and by using the Jigsaw, you're asking all those similar kind of questions, but you're doing it in a framework that people are already familiar with. The neural networks are already there. So we're strengthening existing neural networks as opposed to making new ones. Other questions? Please feel free to, it's a pleasure, Christopher, to unmute yourself if you prefer to ask a question. Just while you're perhaps thinking, just to kind of let you know, our next webinar is on emotional intelligence at work, and that's on the 26th of October. We've also got the virtual taster coming up on the 21st of October. So if you'd like to build your own kind of Jigsaw profile, please get in touch with us there and you can do that. The website is there, jigsawdiscoverytool.com, or you can email me direct, michelle.macarthur@jigsawatwork.com. So thank you to everybody for coming today. Thank you for your questions and for getting involved. I'm happy to stay on the line. If there are any questions, please feel free just to ask.